This is A World on Purpose.
A purposeful life is the most important kind and the most valuable kind of life.
Every choice that we make makes a difference, for better or worse.
I loved walking in a village and seeing the before and after.
This is the podcast dedicated to those humans choosing to live larger by working for the greater good. And these are their stories. Stories of hope and of true change that come from living on purpose.
What if you were to suddenly say there are no challenges, there are only opportunities?
Regardless of where you come from, your financial identity should determine where you end up in life.
I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, and my hope is that my inspiring guests will take you on an introspective journey that helps you tap into your own pivot to purpose, bringing greater meaning to your life. Welcome to A World on Purpose. Physical trauma oftentimes can nudge us in the direction of purpose. Laurie Mackenzie, Development Director for Canadian-based NGO RAVEN Trust, shares how a head injury coupled with a family member's lineage to her First Nations heritage instilled a massive desire to do more for Indigenous communities by raising legal funds to protect the environment they hold so dear, and how these experiences led to her passionate and successful work with RAVEN. Hello, everyone, and welcome back again to A World on Purpose. I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, as you know, and I am beyond excited, as always, and I say that every time, but it's just because it's true. I'm really lucky and blessed to have been put into orbit with some of the most incredible humans doing purpose-driven life, in their life, their work, their beliefs, and today is an exceptional day with my amazing guest, Laurie Mackenzie, who is Director of Development for a really, really cool nonprofit called RAVEN Trust. Laurie, why don't you say hello to everybody and welcome to A World on Purpose.
Well, hello, everybody. I am so grateful to be here. When I did my gratitude this morning, Alyssa, you were the top of the list. And so I'm so happy to just that you thought of me and that you included me here and that I can share some amazing news and stories about RAVEN and the work we're doing.
Yes, and also about some of your other cool endeavors that we'll touch on in segment 3 of our 3-part series with you. I'm honored and I am excited, and my gratitude also included you this morning. So I guess it's a mutual adoration gratitude society. So that's cool. So Laurie, why don't you tell people where you're broadcasting from?
Well, I'm on the the lands of the Lekwungen people and the Wasanic people in Victoria, British Columbia, and Saanich. So it's west coast of Vancouver Island, God's country, what I think is the most beautiful place in the world. And I'm very grateful to be here. So
awesome. And that's really awesome. A great way for us to introduce your segment because you're doing some pretty incredible work. I'm going to just give you guys a little snippet of her bio, but as you know, I love people to tell their own story in their own words. So I'm just going to do a little bit of it to tease it out. And then we're going to dive into Laurie's pivot to purpose, which is clearly what we do every time because this is their origin story and it's meant to help inspire and aspire and just get you excited about purpose. So Laurie she's currently, as I said, the development director for RAVEN Trust. And RAVEN Trust stands for Respecting Aboriginal Values and Environmental Needs. And she's going to tell you what that means because it's very cool and very special and extremely needed in this entire country, probably the world at large. She split her 30-year career equally between hospitality and nonprofit fundraising. She's an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a holistic thinker, and recently became obsessed with pickleball, which I will dive into that a little later and give a shout out to my brother-in-law because he is a pickleball fanatic. So shout out to my brother-in-law, Hansi, on that one. And then she's also been recently very interested in a couple of other things, hero work, Bridges for Women's Society, which we'll touch on as we get in the interview. And then, of course, what we're going to dive really deep into, which is her current passion and love, which is RAVEN Trust. So Laurie, with all of that, can you please share with us and this amazing audience your origin story and your pivot to purpose as we have a police car going in the back?
I was wondering you would get that first. My pivot to purpose story, I actually think I transformed at RAVEN, and mostly because of RAVEN. 3 years ago, I was a very different person. I lived in negative emotions, like fear, anxiety, anger. Like I was a rager when I get mad, and I just was so miserable. And I really through it all, there was always this little inkling in the back of my head whispering, this isn't it. This isn't your life. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And that anchored me to really start to transform. I say by the grace of Gus, God, universe or source, whatever you refer to it, I had several head injuries. And it was because of those head injuries that I was lucky enough to get into a head injury rehab program. And then that's when I really started transforming and knowing that I was living so external and that really I wasn't like looking within, coming from within, and really trusting my source energy, my intuition and stuff like that. So when I started to meditate, be grateful for things, my whole life started changing. And I really truly believe it was a lot of that work kind of, I was able to fold into Raven and change how we showed up in the world as an organization too. So it felt like a slow burn, like after 3 years, when you're in that negativity and heaviness and despair, it just feels so hard and you don't even know where to look to get out. But 3 years back, as I look, I'm like, oh, I can see the steps and the stones and the hands that I walked across the river on that helped me get to where I am. And I'm still just scratching the surface as I, start to find my purpose in life, which is just so exciting to me. So
that's beautiful. It's interesting because a lot of times it is something traumatic, life altering that kind of throws us into that purpose driven life. And so you were talking about how becoming of service and helping others and making impact in the world is a byproduct of becoming the best version of yourself. Can you talk a little bit about why that head injury kind of had that click for you about how your life needed to be more of service, and then how you sort of found that path and that eventually led you to what you're doing now? What was it that kind of shifted that, and then how did you actually find what you were looking to do now?
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of us, that the traumas we experience as adults are really just compounded from the traumas we experienced as children. I did a lot of this ancient Hawaiian prayer as medicine. It's called Ho'oponopono. Mm-hmm. And I was explained to it, it's like when we're born, we have this big bowl of light. And every trauma, every time someone tells you you're not worth it, you won't do that, like the shame you feel, all these rocks are piled in our bowl of light. And so by the time we're adults, we're not even shining our light. And so the head injury gave me a chance to finally slow down. I was just going all the time. I was, working in the hotel. I was working in the nonprofit. I was a mom. I was hustling for my worth all the time. Mm. And once I finally got to slow down, that's when it shifted. And that's when I was like, oh, wait, feeling peaceful feels so good. And so when I started to pay attention to my feelings, then I had the thermometer for how I wanted to go through life. When something didn't feel good, I'm like, okay, and because I was slow enough to know, like, okay, that doesn't feel right. Mm-hmm. Slow down, breathe, drop into it. What feels right? And then I was able, even if the pivot's like, a degree, I'm still like heading towards my light. And so I was so lucky that in Canada, we have a WCB program. It's a work, and if you get hurt at work, you're covered. Mm. And so I had 6 months for the first time in my life to stop. And then when I started, okay, so now not ready for work, but I can volunteer. Wow, that feels good. And then I was always like volunteering before, but when you follow your light, and then you give your energy to where your light is going, then it feels like, oh, okay, now I'm on the track. So I think like getting the space I needed and really following my feelings to be able to show up in that way was the gift that my concussions gave to me. Mm-hmm. And then also through that, really looking at the childhood trauma and doing some soul transformational work to actually heal the trauma, because without that, I was still feeling unworthy. I was still traumatized, right? Like I still had all this heaviness. So it was those writings, those degrees that like, oh, then that brought me to a book or a YouTube video. And it was just like serendipitous, right? How things, when you start to align, things show up. And we've really been able to do that at Raven. Just my executive director and I, Susan Smitten, we are heart-driven, heart-forward people. And so she was able to support my healing. And through that, I was able to bring some, I don't want to say spirituality. What do I want to say? I don't know, love, light into the organization.
Yeah.
And so we come at the world from that, because the work we're doing is heavy. And so we need light for sure.
There's that in the world in general right now too, huh?
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we first talked and met, which I'll give a little shout out to our 1% for the Planet family. We met at a 1% for the Planet Summit, which is a great organization to be a part of. And we'll talk about how Raven Trust is involved with that, just to give them another highlight. You know, my first guest was Kate Williams, and it was like kismet when the two of us met. Obviously, anyone in that group, we're all kind of from the same hearts and minds, clearly, which is lucky. But then you and I met, and it was like, oh my gosh, I must know you. And from that, I remember you telling me a story about how you got into Raven Trust from the experience of your niece, and what it was that shifted. Obviously, the head injury and everything that you just expressed so beautifully was kind of a pivot to purpose. But then how was it that you landed at this amazing organization that's really doing incredible things to lift Indigenous communities around the world? I'd love for people to hear that story, because I thought it was really beautiful.
I don't think you can live in a beautiful place and not be connected to nature. Like, I'm so lucky that I can be in a forest or at the ocean and tangibly feel that in my soul. I didn't know that yet. So when my niece was born, who's biracial, she's from the Pachita Nation up the west coast of the island, also known as Port Renfrew. Her father had passed, but my sister was very determined to keep her connected to the culture. And because of that, she powwow danced, and I would go and support her because I was the best auntie, you know. And so when you get to a powwow and those drums beat, they say all our heartbeats at the same time. You can't not be impacted by that. And then you see the joy on people's faces, the simple things that they find pleasure in. And then you learn about the colonized history of Indigenous people, and you think, wow, they can show up like that with all this love and joy and music and dancing into the night late after what they've gone through. And so I was just so profoundly affected by Indigenous culture that I had never been a part of, even growing up in the Squamish territory in North Vancouver. And so just being in that gave me a profound respect for our natural environment. And then I had this woman who was my mentor, and she's like, I have this job if you want it. I'm like, I'm not looking. She's like, oh, it's like environmental and Indigenous. Just go check it out. And as soon as I walked into Susan's office, it was the exact same kismet that you're talking about. It's like our energies collided. And then she's talking tar sands and open pit mining. And I was like, no, we can't let that happen. Not on my watch. I'm like, I'm always up for a good fight. Where do I sign? Let's do this. And then people just thought the only phone calls we would get were wrong numbers. You know, like people thought we were just raising money to pay for lawyers. They really didn't see the big picture of the legal theory of change. And I think it was because of that, her and I's like commitment to the natural world, to righting the wrongs of the trauma that Indigenous communities have experienced, that we just had this thing that we're like, okay, we're doing this. We're doing this because it's the right thing. And because my heart needs to do this, because this is how I can show up in the world for my own reconciliation journey, to like give to my niece, give to my children, give to my children's children, 7 generations. Like, I needed to do this for me. And the byproduct of that and the impact we're making is just like amazing. Like that, you know, like I felt, and Susan felt like so connected to the work. And then we grew it, and then other people bought in, and it all worked from there. So
that's beautiful. And I think it's so nice that you found that connection through, you know, a family thread, I mean, if humanity is all related in some way, because you're talking about trauma. I mean, I've talked about this before with other guests around, intergenerational trauma in communities that have, these challenges. And yet so many of us as human beings are connected through trauma, in life. And so it's nice that you were able to see the light from this amazing experience, going there just to support, the cultural aspects of your niece's, life, and then be able to turn it into this incredible job, which we're going to get into now. So RAVEN Trust, tell us a little bit about RAVEN Trust and how it started and the history and what you guys are doing. And we're going to dive really deep into part 2 around some of the actual impact that you guys have made. But in this brief little segment, we're going to talk about how you guys got started.
So we'll be 12 years old in 2021 and this year. And so we, very humble beginnings. We started in a borrowed closet of Woodward & Company. Jack Woodward is a prominent Canadian lawyer that works with Indigenous communities for rights and title specifically. And he just saw the need that it's just not fair for these marginalized communities to bear the financial burden of these massive court actions that will benefit, not only Canadians, but, the world. And so a bunch of lawyers just started filing paperwork. They were intuitive enough to get our IRS 50C3 status. We got Canadian status, which I always find so ironic that the government gave us permission to raise money to sue them, essentially. But yeah, so respecting Aboriginal values and environmental needs, it's really like the collision of, Indigenous people are the true keepers of this earth. And without their stewardship and their guidance, their knowledge, their wisdom, we will just flush it all down the toilet. So we really need to rely on them to show us the way when it comes to respecting Aboriginal values, both and environmental needs. So through their court actions, we've been able to partner with them and raise millions of dollars to get them through. And this, like the wheels of justice in Canada, roll very slowly. So these are long-term visions. In Canada, Indigenous rights are enshrined in the Constitution. So they're not going to change with a political party. They're not changing when someone else gets elected. They are enshrined. And the fact that Indigenous communities still need to go to court to fight for the rights that are in the Constitution. Like, I don't need to do that. None of my white friends need to do that. That they are, so we're there as, to support financially. RAVEN was built on $20 donations, but we're also there to support morally, because this is the right thing to do. And just with our energy, a lot of these communities are remote and northern, and they can't tangibly be with us. They're not with us. So, but I know that they feel our energy. I've spoken to community members and so it's just like what started out as us in a borrowed closet with Sue, who got a grant to hire me. We have 7 staff members now. We're on our own. We are raising over $2 million a year. Our impacts are wide. Like, we're just, the trajectory of RAVEN is going up. And the more we grow, the more people hear about us and are like, yeah, of course, this is a no-brainer. It's not a billboard. We're actually making impact. So we're pretty proud of the work we're doing and the nations we partner with. And I always say that it's a trifecta. Like, we need the nations, we need the legal teams, we need the donors, and we need the nonprofit status. And we have that. And so I truly believe we're just poised for great things in this world.
Well, and it says a lot that you can start an organization on $20 donations and still be around 12 years later, raising multi-millions. That's actually doing real measurable impact in the world. It's extraordinary, honestly. Yeah.
And we have funders that Susan met the first year. She went down to a conference and they're still funding us. So that says a lot about our work as well. Wow. As much as we have the $20 donations, we have very generous, what we call major donors as well, who have saw the vision probably even before we did. Right. And so, that's our job. We believe in relationships. We believe the relationships are the basis of everything we do. And so just every day, if we can show up and connect on a human level, we think that is doing our job pretty good.
I think that's so beautiful. Well, that's a great place for us to wrap this first part of our 3-part series with you, because in segment 2, we're going to really dive deep into what RAVEN Trust has done, boots on the ground kind of work, the impact that you've made. We're going to talk about how you guys were impacted by the COVID crisis as well, and Indigenous communities, how they've been increasingly impacted by that, but also the ironic twist of how you guys actually were able to do more this year, which I found an amazing story, which is so inspiring. So we're going to wrap this segment, but before we go, why don't we tell people where we can find you, and they can come back and tune into part 2 and 3.
Okay, so RAVEN Trust is very easy, raventrust.com. And is that what you mean? The website?
Yeah, your website, your email, or however you want people to reach you.
So we are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and obviously online. So raventrust.com, I think, is all our handles. So you can find us there easily. My email is Laurie@raventrust.com. So if you want to reach out and just talk all things Indigenous litigation, I'm always up for that conversation. So that's where you can find me.
That's great. I'm so excited, Laurie. Thank you so much. And this is in particular an issue that is very special to me, and I'll share that a little bit in segment 2. But thank you for being here, and everyone, thank you for tuning in to my awesome 3-part series with Laurie Mackenzie, Development Director from RAVEN Trust. Please come back to part 2 and 3. You're going to learn so much, and at the end, we're going to ask for a call to action for people to really rally around this topic, because I think it's not discussed as much as it should be, and I'm just thrilled to be able to be bringing you this information. So thank you for tuning into A World on Purpose. I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris. Come back for part 2 and 3. Hi again, everyone, and welcome back to A World on Purpose. As you know, I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, and we are here today with my awesome guest, Laurie Mackenzie, Director of Development of RAVEN Trust, based out of Canada. And if you tuned into part 1 of our 3-part series here, we're in part 2 right now, Laurie talked about her awesome experience and her pivot to purpose, her origin story, and how she became passionate about Indigenous communities, and how all of that translated into the work that she's doing now with this really beautiful nonprofit called RAVEN Trust. So, Laurie, welcome back to A World on Purpose.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, of course. I always joke, that it would be really sad if people didn't show up for their own 3-part series. That joke's probably going to get really old soon. Anyway, welcome back. So, we covered a lot in part 1. I really want to dive into what RAVEN has done. For most people who don't know, a lot of Indigenous communities around the world, especially in the United States and Canada, have a lot of stuff that they need support with, environmentally, medically, even as far as like electricity and different things like that. There's a lot of communities that still are really existing with so little support. And I'd like you to touch on what that is and what RAVEN Trust is doing to bring greater support to these Indigenous communities that are incredible people doing great work themselves and that really need the support.
I think one of the reasons RAVEN has been successful is because we are so niche. Our mission is to raise legal defense funds to support Canadian Indigenous nations that need to go to court to defend their rights. Simple. Like, we have no scope creep in that. And so when communities come to us, they have their legal actions, their teams, they know what they're doing, and then they come to us to partner because we're professional fundraisers. That's what we do. It'd be ridiculous to think a nation could take on a fundraising campaign when they need to run a nation. And so when we first started, we had 2, we call them inherited campaigns, the Beaver Lake Cree Nation and the Chilcotin Nation. So that was 11 years ago. One of those campaigns is still going. It hasn't even gotten to court. So you can imagine what the legal costs are 11 years after not even going through, which will likely be a 10-year, a decade-long, legal action to the Supreme Court of Canada. So that's what we do. We show up as partners to raise the legal defense funds. In doing this, communities, and there's a lot of Canadians and maybe a lot of Americans that don't even know that there's Indigenous communities in Canada that don't have access to fresh water, that they're getting cut off with electricity because of their remote location. So they live in less than first world conditions. It's not fair to think that the money they get because of the Indian Act and that racist piece of legislation can cover all of that. They're not even covering fresh water, right? So for them to divert funds away from infrastructure, healthcare, mental health care, housing to pay for these legal actions is just fundamentally wrong, right? And I think that's what people connect with, is they're like, yeah, okay, first of all, they went through genocide, and now we're still making them fight for their rights, although they've been recognized, and we expect them to pay for it. So that's just kind of how Raven was formed. And I think the success that we've had, we try to be really strategic about the cases that we take on. We have some of the most brilliant legal minds in Canada that are on our legal advisory panel. And so we're really looking for, not just, fighting all minds with a judicial review, but we're doing constitutional challenges, our long-term intervener funds, which are shorter term, really impactful, judicial reviews that kind of do more to slow the process of a project than really get a cancellation. So we're just trying to be strategic. And I think that's really worked. Like some of the campaigns beyond Beaver Lake. So Beaver Lake Cree Nation, Northern Alberta Nation, halfway between the tar sands and Alberta, they have a constitutional challenge against the Canadian Alberta governments, claiming that the over 19,000 permits that are currently on their land, that they didn't say yes to any of them, is not allowing them to practice their constitutional right of fishing, hunting, trapping, and gathering berries. And so the former Chief Al Layman saw that the need to protect this land, so he launched this case. The governments have fought tooth and nail for the last 10 years to get this case thrown out. It hasn't worked. When it first started, I don't think a lot of people knew about the case. Now there's international support behind the Beaver Lake Cree. The Wet'suwet'en, also northern BC, they were given, they went through a court case called Delgamuuk, and in that there was a Supreme Court declaration saying that the hereditary chiefs are the only ones that can make decisions on their land for what goes on their land. That's already been decided by the Supreme Court of Canada. But the BC and Canadian governments approved Coastal GasLink to come in and decimate their pristine forest with a GasLink pipeline. So, and then the Chilcotin Nation, it's like they were the first nation in Canada that had a Supreme Court declared right and title over their territory. And they're still fighting a mine that they've been fighting for 12 years. Actually, that just this year, in 2020, we got a decision, and that finally put to rest. But, they have this land that's untouched. There's no telephone poles. They live a life how their generations and ancestors have always lived, and that's how they want to live. And just because we have governments that are resource hungry and corporations that are like just focused on the dollar, people can go in and destroy that. And that's not right. So we are just really here to support the nations, tell their stories. We're storytellers and fundraisers. I think we do a really good job of that. And people have really connected with that. And as we learn more about the trauma that Indigenous communities have faced with residential schools, the 60 scoop and everything else, it's like, as a human, like, I don't know, as a human, how can you not feel like I got to do something, even if it's $20, like I just got to do something. So yeah, I think that's how we've grown and been able to be so impactful and those are just like 3 of our amazing 7 or 8 campaigns that we have going on right now.
That's extraordinary. I'm really glad that people are able to learn a lot about this. And, in college, in high school, I left just because my own family, unfortunate situation. I had to leave to go live with some relatives in a very small town in Northern California. And I was blessed to have had some really amazing friends in high school because there was there was a Indigenous community right within the community. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what they endure and, the discrimination and all the struggles and strife, especially when it's small, remote town.
Oh, yeah.
And you're not part of a large, fortunately, a lot of large tribes that are able to have, bigger economy like casinos and things, even though there's controversy potentially around those too. A lot of the smaller communities just don't have that option.
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate, and, trying to figure out ways to do it. And then you mentioned, we talked too about it. So from there, I went into doing, I studied, at the time they called it Native American Studies in college, and learning that 50%, at least in the United States, of Indigenous communities didn't even still have electricity. How are they going to have economy? How are they going to fight for their rights when, their lands are encroached or in danger? So I love that you're able to take that on, because it is unfortunate. Any communities that we call these marginalized communities really do struggle to have advocacy. But for sure, the Indigenous communities have had to endure a lot also. So on that note, you said you'd serve only in Canada. What about the United States? How is it if there were Indigenous communities in the United States that needed advising or support? Are you able to kind of linchpin off of other organizations? Can they come to you? Will you only serve Canadian nations?
Our mandate is only Canadian. Mm-hmm. It's just the way it is. And the laws are very different, actually, between the two countries. We are affiliated partners with an amazing organization called Seventh Generation Fund out of Northern California. Mm-hmm. And I know that they do good work with American nations. But as far as the scope of our work, our mandate and our nonprofit status, we can only work in Canada, which is super unfortunate.
But there's still a lot of work to be done there. Clearly,
there's just so much work to be done everywhere. It feels so like, I get feel heavy when the weight of it. When I think about all the work that needs to be done, and with Indigenous communities around the world, what's been done to Indigenous communities worldwide is horrible. Yeah. But, we can only help Canadians. So Canadian, and which is unfortunate.
And as an organization, sometimes you have to have mandates, understandable. But it's wonderful that you are doing that. And if people needed, obviously, resources then outside of Canada, and they heard about you through this show, you could refer them to other organizations that could help support them, similar to what you do.
Yeah, we have great partners all over, because we were so small for so long. We had to partner because that was the only way we could leverage what we're doing. So if you are in America, or I don't know why I call it America, if you're in the United States and you have a question or something, just reach out to me and we will find someone somewhere to help.
That's great. And your website is so beautiful.
Thank you.
The content on it is so moving and extraordinary. So even if you're not in Canada and you're looking for information, please go to Raven Trust and check them out, because the way that they're doing their work is great. And we'll talk a little bit about the call to action at the end of how people can support you and get involved. Let's talk a little bit about, if we could dive in just a little deeper to one of your most profound cases that you guys supported and what the outcomes were for that. I think it'd be really interesting for the audience to hear. You talked about the one case that was 11 years. I mean, my gosh, that's still in the works. What about something that had a great outcome at the end, and what was that? Oh, and also, is most of your work have to do with land rights and the environment, or do you also delve into other humanitarian areas, medicine, different things? I think it would be really interesting for people to know.
We're pretty much environmental, like land, water rights, because that's what they're protecting with their rights. But I think one of the most impactful cases is the Chilcotin Nation. So one of our inherited ones. So this is the nation in interior British Columbia. No power lines. They ride horses. They just do their annual horse rides and everything. So when we first started with them, there was this mine, Taseko Mines, that comes in, and Fish Lake is a is a home to rare species of trout. It's on the headwaters of, the richest salmon bearing rivers in British Columbia. It's no joke. Like, it's something that we need to protect. And so Taseko Mines comes in, we have this idea. We're going to build this gold. There's low grade copper and gold underneath your land. We're going to take it out. But what we have to do, we just have to drain this lake and we'll just do our tailings ponds here. And they're like, what? Even the government, even the Stephen Harper government, the conservative government, they said no to it. That's how bad it was.
Wow.
So then they're like, okay, we'll actually build the tailings pond just a little bit upstream. We won't drain your lake. Okay, but you're still like potentially. So then that was said no to by the federal government. And then they start. So that was like a 8-year process or something ridiculous. And then they sue. Taseko Mines sues the government over decisions that were made. And then we were in court for like another 4 years going back and forth. And then the provincial government gives, right before one leader was leaving, literally the day before she was leaving, there's not supposed to be any legislative decisions made. She gives drilling permits to Taseko, so they can go in and make like 150 miles of new roads, build all this infrastructure just to test drill. And they're going to do 60 drill sites all over the place. And then they're like, no, we have this lawsuit already saying you can't even build this one mine. The horrible part about all this is before all this happened, the Chilcotin were given right and title over their land. And because the mine was just on the outside of it, that didn't encapsulate the mine. Mm-hmm. So they have all this protected area. And then just outside of it, where this fish lake is and the stream waters, is super at risk. And so we had to go back to our donors so many times when we had said, this is it, this could be the end, Fish Lake will be saved. And then something ridiculous happens. And then we have to go back and tell them again.
Wow.
It was horrible. And then one day, what was it? I can't even remember. Maybe November, October, we got the email. And when you see the emails come through, you know their decisions. And they're usually 87 pages. And I just want the last paragraph because that's what the decision holds. And then, so Taseko was seeking leave to appeal to the Supreme Court. And in Canada, you have to ask to go to the Supreme Court. And they can say no or they can say yes. And the Supreme Court said no to Taseko. And then at that point, there's nowhere else to go. And then we were like, is this it? Is this really it? Is Fish Lake? Even talking about it today, it's like, through it all, when we were like, oh my gosh, how can we go on? We'd say, the lake is still there. Even though this isn't done, the lake is still there. The mine's not built. And we had to hold on to that.
Wow.
Just to get us through, And I always say this is like how impacted we are sitting in our office and how heavy it is. How's the community feeling? How's the leadership of that community feeling when they have to go back and say, we have to go back to court? Mm-hmm. Elders that testified in the right and title case weren't there to see the end of this because they passed. Oh, and the weight of that to me is like all things with reconciliation. When you feel that shame of that white shame, you're like, oh my goodness, but how do they feel? That must be harder. And so, yeah, so that's one of the things that we're super proud of is that we had the staying power. We could tell the story to the donors that meant they had the staying power because they saw how determined the leadership in the community were, how wrong it was that we can let corporations come in and run roughshod over communities just for $1. Mm-hmm. And then the Fish Lake is saved. I actually have a picture of it in my little other office. And it's like that lake that's of cultural significance for generations. Wow. Now will be culturally significant for more generations. And It's like to know that I had the smallest little role in that. Raven had the smallest little role. It's like when we're talking about purpose, like that's purposeful.
That's so meaningful. I love that. And how long did that process take?
Oh, that was going on before I started at Raven, which was in 2012. So I think that it started 2009, 2008.
Wow.
Well, and Jack Woodward was doing work with them. So, I mean, we're talking. And then they're still in like they've decided to launch a civil claim against the British Columbia government because of what they've had to go through. Yeah.
That's incredible. And I'm sure the communities are so grateful for the work and the support that you've given them. And I do agree with you. That feels very heart-wrenching that the elders didn't get to see that happen. But, their spirit is probably very proud of what all of you have done, both there, together with their community. Thank you for sharing that story. It makes me want to cry. Too. So that's a great place for us to wrap, because I want to talk a little bit about specifically some stuff we touched on when we met around fundraising and why it's so hard, and communities that need to learn to be able to do that, and then how you guys have been able to weather this COVID storm. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a very cool thing that you're working on purely out of your own brilliant mind and heart and soul. So I can't wait to share that with everyone. So before we wrap part 2 of your 3-part series, Laurie, will you tell people where they can find you, please?
Yes. So find our work at Raven at well, it's not www anymore. It's just raventrust.com. I've been told not to say that.
Really?
Well, just by our web guy. He's like, just say raventrust.com. And actually our name is Raven, not Raven Trust. We just put that on the website. So
okay.
raventrust.com, or Raven Trust on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We're all over there. We have an amazing social media coordinator who keeps us online and visible. So we're easy to find.
Great. And everyone, thank you so much for listening to this a very profound and moving story about Laurie and Indigenous communities. And hopefully you're learning a lot of really wonderful information, and you can be passionate about it too. So come back for part 3 so we can learn about how to get involved and some other cool things that Laurie's working on. I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris. Thank you for tuning in to A World on Purpose, and we'll see you soon. Hey everybody, welcome back to A World on Purpose. I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, and I am here today again with Laurie Mackenzie. We're in our part 3 of our 3-part series with her. She is the Director of Development for RAVEN Trust, a very cool organization out of Canada that's supporting Indigenous communities for legal funds for the environment. And so she's talked on a bunch of really cool things, her pivot to purpose, her origin story in part 1 and 2, how she got involved with RAVEN Trust, and what kind of amazing work that RAVEN Trust has been able to do for the Indigenous nations of Canada. So Laurie, welcome back to A World on Purpose. I'm excited to have you get into this part 3.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. So we talked about all the cool stuff that you guys have done so far. There's way more than we can cover here. So for anybody that really wants to see it, please go to their website, raventrust.com. It's beautiful. The stories are amazing. She said, obviously, you're part fundraisers, part storytellers, and that definitely comes through on the website. I want to talk a little bit about COVID and how that has been affecting. If anybody has been watching the news at all, we've seen that it has affected even more every marginalized community around the world, but also the Indigenous communities especially. I'd like you to touch a little bit about that and see what you've been experiencing in Canada with these communities, and then also how, ironically, you had explained to me that the COVID has really actually brought you more attention than you've ever had and more fundraising than you'd ever had, which is just amazing. So can we talk a little bit about those two things?
Sure. Just as a precursor, the work we do is heavy, and there's been a lot of times we've cried as a staff because of decisions that have come down. So I don't know how long ago it was, but Susan and I made a really concerted effort and decision. It was like, we are not coming at this work with fear. Okay, we have to come from love. And we always talk about Raven magic, and I think that's what it is we come from love. Mm-hmm. And so when COVID hit too, it's like we were calculating our burn rate, like what do we need in a day, in a month, so we're not laying people off. Mm-hmm. Like who wasn't in fear at the beginning of COVID? We were having a banner march. We were doing concerts around the country for the Wet'suwet'en. We were like, it was like, this is amazing. And then COVID hit and everything crashed. And so March was great. April was scary. And then all of a sudden, May, June, July, it all just started to swing up again. And we just couldn't figure it out. But the anti-racism everything that was going on in the world, people really started to look within our own country and see that within Canada, Indigenous people are treated as poorly, maybe worse, we don't need to quantify it, as Black people are treated in the United States. And so donations just started coming in, and funders that have been with us just sent checks and said, listen, we don't know how you guys are impacted, but we want to send you this because of the great work you're doing. And so were we, maybe around May and June coming out of it, it's like, we're going to be okay. And then that gave us like the more power to come from love. It's like, coming from love works. So let's do it more. And so we were able to, it was hard. It was hard, working from home, math, everything with the kid, but we were able to come out of it, like not unscathed, but we came out of it strong. Mm-hmm. And that felt super reassuring that the work we're doing could transcend something like a pandemic and all the really dark, heavy stuff that was happening, all the suffering in the world. It's like, okay, but we can still show up for these communities that are doing the hard lifting of, these litigations. So, something I've learned through my work with Raven is there's suffering in this world. I can't suffer enough to stop that. I can't hurt enough to stop you from hurting. I just know that personally, and with the staff at Raven, we have to somehow get out of that and access that light and love, because without that, the money won't come in, the nations won't be supported, and we won't get these decisions that are going to save our environment and our fish relatives and our forest relatives. So that's what we had to do. And looking back now, it feels like it worked, because for the first time, Susan and I always said, okay, we work hard to pay, the light bills, the staff, everything. If we are in our perfect world, we don't have to raise money for Raven. We can just focus on the communities. And this was the first year we had a surplus that we actually gave back to communities, because we were all taken care of. And to do that in a year of a pandemic, it was just like, the ancestors are behind us. We're doing something right. So felt good.
That is so powerful. How can you not love that?
It's pretty powerful, the work. Yeah,
it is, to have a banner year, extraordinary. Kate Williams said the same thing about 1% this year. They had more people sign up this year than they have in the last, probably since I started with our family like 15 years ago, which is,
wow.
It says a lot that a global pandemic and the strife that everyone is dealing with could really churn that kind of support out for organizations. Let's talk just a little bit about 1% for the Planet, just because that's how we met. And I'd like to know what inspired you to get involved with 1% and how that has helped Raven Trust.
Yeah, I found 1%, I think within the first 6 months I started working at Raven, just looking for grants, and then some organizations grant through their 1% commitment. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, what is this? And then I was like, 1%, I love it. Number one, I love how their name is like 1% of your net sales or whatever it is. And so then just started to align ourselves with amazing companies. Like, businesses have really stepped up this year for us, and we've been trying to build those relationships for many, many years. So to be with a group of, when I was at that conference, I was like, I have arrived with my people. Where have they been? Finally, we're all focused on the environment. We're all focused on the same things. And then, 1% for the Planet people are just putting their money where their mouth is. Like, they're just really showing up. It's like, we're not just going to be sustainable and all these other things. We're going to give to organizations that are also doing good work like us. So, yeah.
Right. It's great.
So honored, to be a partner with them.
Yeah. And so brands can actually either support you directly, or if they want to be part of that ecosystem, they can join and be part of 1% as a brand, and also funnel funds to you through them too.
Yeah.
Obviously, direct is probably always better, but it's nice to know that there is a community at large doing this kind of amazing stuff to support what you're doing. So
totally.
I just wanted to, I thought that was really, really wise of you guys to do that, because it's a wonderful organization. And when you have others in the same passion area, it just again generates and out that exponential, proverbial pebble in the water that goes out, the ripple. Yeah. So the last thing I want to touch on with Raven before we get into your amazing work that you're starting to do is you're fundraisers, obviously, and you had talked a little bit about how it was difficult, for communities to raise money for themselves, and that you guys had to have this organization. Why is that so difficult in these communities? And you wanted to be able to hopefully eventually teach these communities to be able to do it themselves. I'd love for you to touch a little bit on that, because I thought it was pretty powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have to go to school for years for fundraising, but you still have to learn, right? And there's certain steps, processes that build successful fundraising campaigns. To hand that to a nation, and it's not that it's the nation. If I handed it to my husband in his job, like, he wouldn't be able to do it either, right? Because we've built this and how it works. So it was never. Yeah, I just like to think of this in an environment like where they're dealing with healthcare, mental health issues. Like, I'm thinking right now of being up at Beaver Lake Cree Nation, sitting in their health offices, having meetings with the chief and everything. And then it's like everyone's got a job. It's like fundraising off the side of the desk is not effective. And that's why I am an advocate for organizations hiring a dedicated fundraiser. It's a full-time job, and you need that. So you can't expect the woman who answers the phone at the health center or the chief or anybody else to raise $1 million for their own legal actions. It's just not going to happen. So yeah, we actually have a grant application into an amazing Canadian organization that we're just trying to get some youth in the community involved in our work, and so they can start to learn, like how they can, Indigenous peoples are like born storytellers. Like, how can they use that to start to build that infrastructure and in their own community, not to take it away from Raven. We're not afraid of anybody taking our job. We actually always say, like, in a perfect world, we'll work ourselves out of a job because our services will no longer be needed. But just to get not only Indigenous people involved in that way, but to build more Indigenous fundraisers. We are a staff of white women who have come under fire because we have no Indigenous representative on staff. We are Indigenous led on the board level and through our legal advisory panel. But my argument is, like, I've never met an Indigenous fundraiser. So if they're not there, how can we train them? How can we identify them? How can we lift them up to where they can be helping their own communities? So yeah, we'll see, fingers crossed, if we get that. And also to that grant applications to translate us to bilingual. Being on the West Coast, we're very unilingual. So we just want to be more, we have a national scope. So we just want to involve the whole country, French-speaking people, Indigenous communities. And yeah, I'll teach someone anything they want to know if they can do it themselves.
That's great. And I think that's important the reason I called that out is because part of all the stuff that's happened this year, with the uprising, which is absolutely rightfully so in so many of these communities around the world, not empowering, not giving tools to help empower the communities, and people being afraid of working themselves out of a job instead of empowering the communities to be able to take care of themselves and feel like they can, which I think is really important. So I appreciate you sharing that, because people who care and have a heart are always aware of how we can do better, right?
Yes.
How can we do better? We may not know how to do it right, but we want to be taught too. So reciprocally, how can they help teach you to do it better, right? So I think it's really important to point that out. And thank you for sharing that, because I think the transparency is awesome. So that was amazing. I'm so excited about everything you're doing with Raven Trust. It's very cool. But one of our goals here too, in A World on Purpose, is to also be able to kind of give a little bit of an insight into, who you are as a person, besides just what you do and the incredible work that organization is doing. And so you have one of your own passions that you've decided to to start and launch, and I think people will be really excited to hear about it. So tell us about that. I don't want to give it away. You tell us.
Okay. I don't even know how to start. In the last couple of months, I've been working through so much fear when it comes to launching this course. So I really, in the last 3 years, feel like I've transformed my soul. And that little inkling that was in my head that was like, there's more. Like, I feel that was my higher self. And I think I'm called to share that with people, to help other people transform themselves into just like the beings that they're supposed to be, the best versions of themselves. So to start, I'm doing this 8-week course just to walk people through the steps that I took through my transformation process. And I really truly believe that it will help other women. I don't only work with women, but reading this Glennon Doyle book right now, Untamed, talking about women and purpose. And it's like, whoop, I'm on fire right now. So yeah, I'm really, really called to help other people transform, because the lies we've been told, the cages we've put ourselves in, the things that we've been taught since we were old enough to listen of what we should act and think and say, it's just all an illusion. And
Right.
We are like God, like Gus. I think God, the word God scares some people. So I say Gus, God, universe or source, whatever that is, that alignment, that higher purpose, that higher self, that's who we are. And when we get in touch with that, wow, the things that we can create is just like amazing. So
I agree. And also, I think all of that, any one of us, especially now this year, can learn tools to help us mitigate fear, self-defeating thoughts, all of that kind of stuff. Can you just give us a little bit of an idea, or is it too early to tell us like what kind of things will be in the course, or do we have to wait?
No, you don't have to wait. I'm actually just in the process of content creation right now. So the thing that changed my life, 3 things, I think. Law of attraction, knowing that I have a electromagnetic vibration around my heart that attracts, things to me. I was like, what are you talking about? And once I learned about that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's a game changer. Gratitude and meditation. That's the first course, the first module. They, without being still, we can't hear our inner guidance. Without being grateful, we are either the past or the present. And without knowing that there's no assertion in the universe, there's only attraction. Those 3 things, like obviously there's 7 more modules than that, but those 3 things were like, I can't even, so profound, and how they shaped my life, that once I knew those things, I was like, yes, I can create. I had to work through fear and shame and unworthiness. Like there's so many more things, but that was the base that I was like, yeah. With that, yes, of course we can create anything. Of course we can create anything we want. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So what, is there an idea in your mind when this course might be available to the rest of us humans who could always use extra tools?
Well, what I actually think my first goal was December 29th to launch it, which was today.
Right.
Hilarious. But since I don't stress out about things anymore and realize I need to learn how to do this, I'm hoping I really wanted to launch it in 2020 to be like, there you go, world, take that. Yeah. But I'm also like, okay, cool, 2021's okay. So by the end of January, I'll say it now, end of January, it's going to be
great,
up and running.
And how can people get a hold of this course? Through you? That's separate from your day job.
From Raven, yeah. So it's Lolo Mac is my Instagram handle, and that's my website. I'm on Facebook, but I'm sure there's a million other Laurie Mackenzies. Quite a common name. But yeah, Instagram, you can find me easily. It's Lolo Mac. So,
and all of that will obviously be on the website too, along with Raven Trust and everything. Well, I'm excited to see that, because I'm always about self-improvement. I've been doing that, my entire adult life since I was 17. And there just aren't too many tools, as far as I'm concerned, to know how to, and to get other people's insights and stories, because there's always something a little relatable in there, to what you experience. So. And I think that'll be super. Very cool, Laurie. So with that, I have an ask of you of what you want to ask our audience. This is the part where we get to do sort of your call to action and how you would love to find people to get involved, excited, mobilized into action on your behalf, on Raven's behalf. So what would be your call to action for the audience?
Well, obviously check out the website, but I think deeper than that is like check your relationship with reconciliation. So I don't know if in the United States you talk a lot about that, but in Canada we had a Truth and Reconciliation Council that really started to identify how as a country we can move forward. So we've done a lot of learning and unlearning as staff, how we show up as white women, privileged and everything else. And that's a hard path to walk. Mm-hmm. And I invite people to look at their journey with anti-racism and their work with anti-racism and just start to dive into that, because I think that's the key in doing the work with Indigenous communities, Black communities. It's like we got to learn how to step into that mm-hmm. in the right heart space, coming from a place of love, not fear and everything else. But yeah, do check out Raven Trust. RavenTrust.com. We actually have some resources on there that can support what we call courageous conversations. It's like, how do you sit at the dinner table with your racist Uncle Bob, who just has these stereotypes about Indigenous people? How do you have those conversations without never being invited back to Christmas dinner? So
pretty sad if that happens, but I think I love that, courageous conversations. I think that's a really great way to frame it. For everyone who is interested in learning more about Raven Trust, all of that information that Laurie shared will also be on the World on Purpose website under her name and bio, etc. And I just am so excited that you were here. Thank you for sharing all of that. One more thing for anyone in the States, because this is Canada-based, Laurie did touch on in part 2 that there are partner organizations in the United States for anyone who's looking to do anything to support Indigenous communities here in the United States, which is where I am. And I'm sure Laurie is a brain trust of information for Indigenous communities anywhere else that need support. Really, really excited, Laurie, that you came here and shared all of this. I'm particularly passionate about Indigenous nations. A few people in my life are too. And shout out to all the people that I know who have struggled with that are from First Nations. They really need love and support, and we all do. But I just this is about them today, so I wanted to make sure we called that out. Thank you so much, Laurie, for being here. Why don't you tell people one more time where they can find you for Raven and your new awesome self-development course?
Yeah. So raventrust.com. All our handles are Raven Trust. It's lolomac.com. It's lolomac on my Instagram, and it's lolomac@gmail.com. So it's pretty much all lolomac.
Awesome. I like that, lolomac. I think that's cute. That's a good. I need a fun nickname.
Oh, well, I'll get you one.
Okay, you assign one for me. I'm going to have to see what that is. My godsons call me Tiny E.
That's cute.
Yeah. So that kind of works. Anyway, much love to you. Thank you so much for coming, Laurie, and spending time with me today. And everyone, thank you for tuning into A World on Purpose and hearing all about First Nations and Laurie and the incredible stuff they're doing at Raven Trust. Look into them at aworldonpurpose.com or all of their social handles. And thank you for coming back. We will see you again soon. Have a fabulous day.
Thank you for taking this journey into A World on Purpose with our incredible guests. To learn more about our amazing guests and their inspiring purpose-driven work, please go to aworldonpurpose.com. Don't forget to look at our call to action of the week to mobilize your desire for purpose into action. A World on Purpose can be found on Apple Podcasts and all the major podcast platforms, and the video version can be found on YouTube. If what you heard today inspires you, please write a review and like and share on the platform of your choice. We'd love to also hear from you and learn your pivot to purpose and the meaningful work that you do that lifts humanity. Send your stories to info@aworldonpurpose.com. I'd like to thank our World on Purpose team for making this show a reality. Once again, I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris. Thank you for tuning in to A World on Purpose. I look forward to seeing you soon.